Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We're excited that you took the time out to spend this time with us. My name is Patrick Vandenberg at Cyware. I'm VP of Product Marketing here. I've been in the cybersecurity space for over 25 years in various segments and a lot of time in security operations and threat intelligence space. I will be your host today, and I'm really excited to be joined by Sachin Jade, our Chief Product Officer. Sachin, please introduce yourself.
Hey, thank you so much, Patrick. And it's a pleasure to be here talking about something that's, I think, near and dear to all of our hearts with the recent things in AI. So my name is Sachin Jade. I am the Chief Product Officer, been in the business risk and security space for most of my professional career on all sides of the table, as an entrepreneur, as an operator, as a subject matter expert, researcher, engineer, and then advisor. So this is something that's awesome, and I hope you guys will also love our conversation.
Excellent. So let's get us started here. So title of our topic or session today, Agents of Change, enabling threat-centric security operations and agentic AI to defend at scale. So let's get us started. We'll have a look at our agenda here for a little bit. So format for our session today, we're going to tap into Sachin's expertise for much of this. So first off here will be conversational. Bit of a Q&A with Sachin to help us understand across some various topics what we're really looking at in around threat-centric security operations, including the whole AI or agentic AI conversation. Then we're going to move to a demo so that you can see this, these capabilities, these advancements happening in real time. And then obviously we will for sure have time for Q&A. Would love to get your questions in. So please drop your questions as we're working through this session. Drop them in the chat, and we'll fire off those questions to Sachin at the end so that we can get his responses to your inquiries. So with that said, let's move into the first part of our conversation here. All right, so changing landscape. Session. We know there's been lots of change. We've been seeing acceleration and change too, which is fun to experience. So let's start off with the foundation here. What is the state of threat intelligence today? And what does this leave us as the key challenges that security teams, security organizations are facing?
Yeah, no, great starting point for this conversation. And as the audience probably have heard it and spoken in different conversations and or read in different blogs, even with the RSA that just happened a month ago or so, the threat landscape from an intelligence perspective has evolved significantly over the last 2 decades. It started off by having CTI as a pure research division, if you want to call it that way, by identifying where the threats might be occurring from, how do you investigate it, how do you pass it on. But after that point, it was given to the security operations team in one way, shape, or form. It was kind of siloed, disparate, separated. Then it started to evolve into a little bit more glued, if I can call it, where folks were, once I have the intelligence, can we do certain things in tandem with the security operations? And that's where we brought in this whole notion of operationalizing threat intelligence, which is how do you start doing actionability on something that needs both from a end-to-end perspective on what the intelligence is and what you do with it. But what that quickly led to was the amount of threat intelligence data that got coming in. When you think about it, it's coming from your internal systems, external feeds, your partners, especially if you're in a community with ISACs, etc. So lots of data coming in. So now what do you do with it? How do you start figuring out what is relevant to me? Because unless and until you understand the definition of a threat intelligence that is in context within my enterprise ecosystem, you will be taking decisions on certain things that might not be relevant. Number two, the signal to noise ratio. If it's so degraded, then you are taking a lot of time and effort And so from your all the KPIs, whether it's MTTR, MTTV, etc., you are starting to take a lot of operational complexity and the TCO goes up. So the AI in 2023-ish, if you want to call it, when it started coming in, the dichotomy basically became, hey, we've got a lot of intelligence. Can we leverage AI to make certain things much more feasible? But then came the notion of how do you start leveraging AI the right way? So you have this nebulous mesh of things, all the way from threat intelligence being evolved as something that is cornerstone for security operations, but the actionability of that and the operationalization of the threat intelligence still having a lot of challenges. So this is where I think AI can help with the right information, right guardrails, right technology, right implementation.
All right, so we're digging into AI right away, are we? Okay, so I got a follow-up question for you on that one. And yeah, there's no getting around it. We know that we're living it. There's lots of dimensions to the AI conversation. So let's start broadly. What are we really dealing with when we're talking about AI today? So you can look at that from strategic view if you want, but there's the expectation dynamic here. There's the reality versus hype. So let's start off with your perspectives on what we're really dealing with in mid 2026 here.
Yeah, another great question, and I'll try to center it around some very recent conversations, even at the summit that I'm at right now. Talked to one of my researcher friends. They've been trying to do a lot with AI-driven coding for security operations. How do you build certain capabilities around it? There is this notion and expectation that AI will solve everything, and maybe at some point it may, but we're still in the first or second innings, if you want to call it that way. There are lots of things that need to be enforced in the right way to make it happen. Now, having said that, if the strategic notion of how AI can help is looked at from the lens of what the adversaries are doing and how we need to keep pace with it as well. Adversaries, threat actors have never played by rules. They've always did whatever they want to in one way, shape, or form because they want to get to the crown jewels as soon as possible and exfil. Even Anthropic, that released their findings in November of 2025, said that there was one attack that was almost completely done by AI. There was maybe about 10% human intervention, but other than that, the entire TTP of the 5 steps of getting in, doing the reconnaissance, figuring out the lateral movement that is possible, understanding what the identity privileges can be exploited, then exfil out as well. That entire chain was done by the AI on the adversarial side. No novel technique whatsoever, but doing it at scale. So the adversaries didn't need to, take on too much cost. They didn't need to spend their brain cycles to figure out a new novel concept. All existing concepts, but done at scale and allowing the AI, which is non-deterministic on the adversarial side as well, to start thinking of how it can actually penetrate certain ecosystems. Now, that's a complete shift in paradigm from what used to happen before. And so, from a defense standpoint, threat intelligence becomes so paramount as well, because you have to now identify not just the actors that are doing certain things, but the behavior of those actors. And to make that behavior of that actors much more identified from the defense perspective, you need to get that data, contextualize it appropriately, and then say, yeah, you know what, in this particular case, I can take an action which is also can be scaled as the adversarial scale happens. One of the implementations, for example, the advice that we gave was, how do you start figuring out the lateral movement possibilities, with distinguishing that from an agent that an AI agent is doing on an adversarial side with a human? The adversarial AI could do close to about 1,000 API lookups in milliseconds because that's how it is constructed. And so that typically doesn't happen from a user agent perspective and where the guardrails are and so on. So these are all the expectations that AI will just solve it. Not immediately. We've got to take the baby steps, make sure that we've got the right implementations of the AI component appropriately, leveraging the threat data and then enabling the actionability. But all of these things are needed because, as I said, given the example of what Anthropic just released in the November of 2025, this is needed.
So, last question then on this section. What does, and I think everybody can really appreciate that, and how fast these ecosystems are moving way beyond human pace, and it's not just a data and complexity anymore, like the adversarial nature of these AI frameworks coming at cybersecurity teams. It changes things so drastically. So can you speak to, for security operations, what that might look like? I was going to ask over the next year, but I don't know if the next year is relevant. What does that look like? What, maybe at a higher level at this point, what does that look like maybe for the next 6 months?
Yeah, great question. When I break down, your classic SOC operations in your level 1, level 2, level 3, level 1 triaging that typically used to happen, and that's also needed at scale, that is decently possible in a much better way through agents and AI as supporting components. Level 2, level 3, where humans still have to identify certain things, think a little bit around what that context involves, or who do I actually bring in from a conversation standpoint, collaboration, discussion, etc. That is still sometimes off. But can we already start seeing some of those in execution mode? Can we see them rewarding certain elements? Yes. Level 1, I think in the next 6 months, yes, that's a sweet spot. Level 2, level 3 is a little bit longer, but I think this also then helps folks such as ourselves and the cybersecurity professionals to identify where to put the dollars in, because at the end of the day, enterprises still are dealing with a limited budget capacity in one way, shape, or form, and so they need to identify, if I have that dollar, where do I spend it? Level 1 makes that easy shift. Level 2, level 3 is a little bit more taxing from a capital standpoint, and so to make that happen. So that's how I would look at it. Now, having said that, the other component of this is, which is pretty close to our hearts as well, which is how do you take advantage of what we call the community or the collective defense perspective? Because just by the very nature of what threat attackers do, and they collude, and that collusion has been increasing significantly thanks to AI as well, unfortunately. We have to collectively collaborate on two things. One, the signals around what is relevant from a threat perspective, and second is how do you defend. So if organization X knows how to defend against a certain threat profile, it's awesome if they can actually share it so that the rest of the organizations can take that defense capability as well. This, in our hypothesis and in my personal view, is probably the only way we can amortize the cost of defense at scale, given how the threat attackers are doing. So hopefully that gives a little bit more context to how the changing landscape is asking security operations to change, not at just the enterprise level, but an inter-enterprise level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so with that, I think this is a good time for shifting to our next part of the conversation then. All right, so AI is definitely a dominant factor in this changing landscape, but threat intelligence is critical still. So let's talk about the importance of threat intel in this new world, this new era that we're looking at. How does, with this shift in AI being this driving force, how does threat intelligence play in this shift?
Yeah, so long time back, and AI has been there for quite some time. Even in my past, we would deal with the traditional ML and genetic algorithms. What has happened in the last few years is the entire conversation that any human or anybody for any system, any machine as well, having with these AI and agents in a very English-driven language, and so a higher language conversation that leads to whatever the output that you need. So that has kind of changed the paradigm. If I put that as an overlay to something that we do in the threat intelligence space, you deal with both unstructured and structured data. And so when you are combining the structured and unstructured data, that common flavor of a language, a higher form of language uniform, which is English in this case, for example, helps significantly. Now, let me take one step back. A typical analyst, what he or she is doing in their job is they're looking at significant unstructured data that might be coming from it, alerts, advisories, somebody putting in certain components, etc. Then a whole bunch of structured data that might be coming from your IPs, indicators, malwares, vulnerabilities, etc. So not only do they have to now figure out, hey, what is relevant to me from this threat feed or data that's coming on the structured side, how do I marry it with certain things that are coming from the unstructured side? For example, identify the contextualization of that and then say, okay, now I need to take decisions around it. The entire life cycle is for a threat analyst such as myself would be to look at that data coming from multiple different sources, both unstructured and structured, then try to figure out, do I dedupe it? Do I normalize it? Do I enrich it? Do I get some more context around it? Figure out what is relevant from a risk and a priority standpoint, and then finally say, I know what, I'm going to take certain action against it. Now, if I look at from the other angle, which is security operations, which is typically your incident response teams, triaging certain things, and so on, they're almost always being exposed, which is something has happened. Okay, let me now take certain actions against it, whether I want to block a firewall, block an IP on a firewall, etc. If I can have much stronger threat intelligence that gives me context to what my ecosystem is, what my coverage is based on what are the things that are happening from an external threat landscape, and already predictively tell the security operations guys on the other side saying, these are the three possible scenarios that might be happening because of a threat actor who typically attacks a tech stack X. That gives so much power to security operations now to say, yeah, you know what, I can actually create my detection rules in a different way, my URL rules, etc., in a different way, already implement it so that you are now changing from a reactive posture to more of a proactive posture and a preemptive posture. So that's the shift that we can actually see happen if you bring in threat intelligence as the core, as the brain, if you want to call it.
Very nice. Well, I don't think we can have this conversation without acknowledging the world that we're in right now, because there's been lots of focus on geopolitical activities, of course. So, how has the AI-driven, perhaps disinformation, state-sponsored activity changed the way we're looking at prioritizing, seeing our threat intelligence?
It is indeed a different time that we are living in. My researcher friend, who we work very closely with, his input was even security researchers, analysts, etc., are having a hard time trying to figure out what's the right mix of valid data versus it's misinformation, etc. And unfortunately, AI is causing significant challenges in that from the other side. And so the collective defense component becomes even more important now because just by the nature of data, if we can have multiple sources from an internal trusted community, if you want to call it, giving more credibility to a certain data or information perspective, that helps block the misinformation and helps identify what is relevant to each one of those enterprises to take decisions around it. In this case, AI on a defensive side also helps because you have models that can identify what is away from the norm, so to speak. But when you combine this with that collective community information, for example, if certain things are happening in a particular sector, but that was glorified in a misinformation way by certain components being added, that can be extracted out because of the data that's coming from the pool of community providers. So you need to mix that, which is enterprise data segmentation, enterprise data prioritization, risk scoring, etc., but then give it back to the community and take the community feedback as well so that you know exactly what you're working on. It is indeed a tough problem to solve at times, but I think that is where the power of community comes handy.
Yeah. And so So let's put this into maybe just to wrap up in this section. Let's move to kind of a pragmatic lens on it. What do enterprises ultimately need from their threat intelligence, given everything that you shared in the past few minutes?
Yeah, no, it's an awesome question. CTI, as I was mentioning in the past, CTI has always been, hey, this is a research institution or research part of it, which, I mean, it was the origins of CTI in one way, shape, or form. But given the switch and the more continuum that I'm calling security operation continuum that has to happen, enterprises who would look at threat intelligence just as a feed have to change their mindset, which is more operationalization of the threat intelligence that is coming from multiple different areas, which means you need a platform, a base platform to start off with that enables the entire life cycle, enables you from a day zero operations perspective to get the quote unquote data that you need from internal, external sources, something that is also natively inbuilt, for example. Second is that entire automated life cycle of figuring out what is relevant to you from your risk prioritization parameters and KPIs. And last but not the least is on the other side, not having to go into 17 different systems to figure out how do you integrate with these to make certain actions happen. And so that's been the thought process. And even at Cyware, that's what we kind of enforce, which is when customers bring our cyber intelligence suite to bear, it gives them that day zero operation pretty much from the get-go, which is you've got a platform that manages the entire threat intelligence component. You have certain other capabilities that you want to bring in, for example, your compromised credentials, your deep web, dark web monitoring, etc. You can bring them as well. So that gives you that unification, and then the normalization, the deduplication, the enrichment, the scoring, etc., and then the orchestrate capability that we have, which integrates several different endpoints. We have about 400 plus connectors, and so you can have it with your EDRs, the XDRs, the SIEMs, etc., so that you can change those YARA rules, the detection rules directly as you need to, and so on. Everything based on rules. If you want to build it, rules are out of the box as well. And so, from a TCO and an operational complexity standpoint, for the enterprises, this changes the game because now they don't have to worry so much about what is my mean time to value. But more importantly, now they can start focusing on what is it from a business or a security analyst's role perspective, what they should be doing and when they should be doing in the actionability perspective. So that's how I think the game is changing, and that's what the enterprises do need right now.
Yeah, and I think that fits with the disillusionment we've been hearing, maybe for a couple of years now from CISOs and all of their investment in CTI, and not realizing the value is the systems that you put in place have to take advantage of the threat intel that is available. So that's where operationalization and actioning and platforms or capability ecosystems that understand how to derive pointed prioritized intel and drive into actioning. So we can't get through this without this last topic, and then we're going to get into the demo. So let's have a couple of quick questions on this one. AI and governance. I mean, we heard it nonstop at RSA and other events, and even one-on-one conversations with customers. So let's talk about that element here. AI has a lot of expectations, and those expectations are sometimes real, not real. We've heard about this agent washing. So let's first, what's working with AI in cybersecurity, and maybe then talk to what's not working. The hype side of it versus the reality, because it's great to be excited about it and have bold strategic initiatives, but you have to get from your point A to your point B. And sometimes that that requires some elements that maybe aren't coming out in these aspirational conversations. So share with us what's working in AI, and then let's talk in that agent washing versus reality.
Yeah, I think every kind of history of technology has shown us every innovation that comes up, the innovation part of it always leads, and the governance, the regulations, the compliance perspective typically kind of lags. And in some cases, that's just the very nature of the beast. And in some cases, it's enforced in a different way. And I think it's even more challenging in this particular era because you have tools that your employees can use outside. And so they have that mindset of if I'm able to use this on my personal side, whether it's my GPT or other things, why can't I just use it here in the enterprise world as well? And so that brings that dichotomy of like, yeah, you do want to allow your employees to do certain things, but then you need to guardrail it and fence it appropriately. Uh, I was talking to somebody, I think maybe a month ago or so, and they put in a new quote unquote code logic built, leveraging some of the AI tools. And unfortunately, they didn't have the right guardrails, and it deleted some of the databases that they were using. And this is one of those notions that starts to happen. And how do you start to maintain balance around innovation and regulation? One of the good frameworks that has worked in technology over the last decades is some sort of a maturity model thought process, which is you are starting off with the nascent era of like I've got a tool sprawl, I've got a usage sprawl, etc. Where do you take it into the level two, the classic CTI-ish CMM model, if you want to call it? When do you take it to level three, level four, level five, etc.? And so one of the components of that is some sort of an enterprise AI risk register. That the need for that from an enterprise perspective is because there'll be a lot of shadow AI projects that may happen, unfortunately, in enterprises just by the very nature of the employees being used to it in the outside world. And so they would like to build certain things, and then every vendor will bring their agents, which is the right way to do it. But at the same time, enterprises need to make sure that they have this register which tells them what vendor, what AI, what models, what are the functions that they do, what are the guardrails that you can put around it, how does the drift, quote unquote, either be addressed or block it when that happens, etc. And so, what is working in the security space from an AI perspective is that level one, still good triage, so that the human can take the action after that, because your signal to noise ratio is now really efficient, and the human doesn't have to work too much on a deluge of data. Where they need to start, and where all of us need to start being very cognizant and very deliberate, is identifying where do you put AI and where do you still leverage the old model, so to speak. We are a threat intelligence platform, and a operationalization of threat intelligence is our mantra. And so when you think about that, we deliberately ask our own internal folks as well as customers saying, how does AI help do your job better? If it doesn't solve some of those practical use cases, just implementing AI for the sake of AI may backfire at times. And so it's very important, it's extremely important so that enterprises, be at the C level, be at the managerial level, to get that in their culture, saying AI has potential, it works. We need to have the use cases that actually drives value, and build the enterprise AI risk register so that we identify what is the AI models that we are going to be using, what are the vendors, how do their agents work, and what are the guardrails around it. So I think it is a big landscape that needs to be addressed, and it will evolve, but this is the nature of the beast. Innovation leads, regulation, governance starts to follow.
So you've spilled right into my wrap up question on it. So the direction around governance. So I'll just throw this at you. Is there any starting steps that you might recommend for governance relative to AI adoption?
Yeah, fantastic question. There is this whole notion in the industry, and it's been there for quite some time, which is fail fast, do things fail fast. Got a different notion or a different take on it, which is succeed small, which is and that becomes very critical in the AI landscape, which is you take a small project, if you want to call it, understand the ins and outs of it so that you know how the data flows in, where is the data governance coming into the equation, because at the end of the day, the model are working on some data one way or the shape of the other. Second is what is the action that the agent does? Where does the human come in? And what happens when the agent drift happens? And so things of that nature. So do a small project on the MVP side, understand the ins and outs, build that risk registry framework that I was alluding to. And that helps the enterprises to start this entire journey. And it is not a, it is not a, hey, I'm going to make it once, keep it on the shelf for the next 5 years. Now it's a living, breathing thing. Every 30 days, every 60 days, every quarter, you've got to visit it, start changing it or updating it based on new findings, because the AI landscape is changing so fast. So that's the starting point that I would recommend folks to start leveraging a governance mindset.
Okay, so that was a great conversation. We've got some broad perspectives from you, Sachin, on AI, both adversarially and as an empowering mechanism in cybersecurity, of course, which is a massive conversation. We've talked about threat intelligence place in all of that, and governance guardrails, like making these first steps and how to embrace that in a safe way for the organizations, because that's the whole point. So let's move from the market view to, all right, we have solutions available that are embracing this and helping move security teams forward. So please jump in here and share. So we're seeing a little bit here of Cyware's approach with AI. So take us into that.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And audience, hopefully you'll start seeing what we spoke about and how that kind of marries into what Cyware and our thought process. By the very nature of AI, it is non-deterministic. And so when we went into an evolutionary phase of AI within our product set, we kind of broke it into three evolution components, if you will. One was kind of very low-hanging fruit. What an analyst is doing, how to help them out in extraction, summarization, etc. Second one was more of interoperability of these components on the AI landscape perspective. And this, we took a very deliberate decision and time in terms of like how the agents should be structured and why these agents are needed. This has three flavors around it. One that revolves around what an agent means. Second is how does the operator, analyst, etc., interact and or work with these agents. And third is how do you enable customers to figure out the explainability around it. And so we took definitions and laid it out from an objective goal perspective to all of these agents. So the definition of the agent itself became what is it driving towards? What is the goal? What is the objective? So that you know if it does drift, you can stop it as needed. Second is how do they interact with these agents? Operators can interact it within our UI, and I'll show you some of those examples. But if you're in your workflow, you are trying to build it in one way, shape, or form, through integration, through all other vendors that you may have, agents in there spread as well. You're building your own workflow. How do you incorporate? How do you invoke these agents, etc.? You have that flexibility as needed. And last but not least, the entire concept of guardrails, if you will, which is the audit trail mechanism, the explainability that is there. So any customer can leverage access, leverage APIs to get the data around it from an audit trail perspective. And so the agents that we chose from a catalog of why these agents to be built, because we're a threat-centric mindset, operationalizing threat intelligence. And so the agents that you see are very much geared towards how do we leverage that information to make that security operations much better, which is threat intelligence agent. What does that do? Threat intelligence agent is typically focused on, enabling the analyst identify all the components of a threat indicator, quote unquote. You have the contextual intelligence agent, which is primarily geared towards what are the other contextual information I can get. You've got the threat bulletin agent that is around how do I create reports very quickly, because an analyst does spend significant amount of time doing this. And as we were discussing, it is both structured and unstructured data at that point. And last but not the least that we'll show is the alias consolidation agent. I think we've all been there in our practitioner mindset, which is a threat actor is probably called by 20 different names, by 20 different components in the market. So how do you start figuring out that is the main threat actor, so to speak, that we are looking at? And so from a demo perspective, what I'm going to show you is typically how a threat analyst does his or her job. What does their day look like, quote unquote, when they're in our platform? And where do these four agents come into the equation where they can actually take advantage of that any which way? As I said, the manifestation of this is through our portal, through our browser at the moment, but you can invoke it any which way based on your workflow that you might be leveraging. With that, I will start the demo, Patrick, and maybe we'll go as many questions as needed after that. So this is typically, this is how our portal is, quote unquote, and you see the agents on the side, which is based on our browser extension for this manifestation and for this example. And as I said, you can use all of these agents appropriately in your workflow, the way you need it, and so on. On the left, where you see the AI summary, this is typically how somebody comes in, an analyst comes in. He or she is trying to work off this threat indicator object, trying to identify what's all the details that he or she can go in, figure out, in a threat investigation mode, a complete detail mode, etc. But when that individual needs to do this at scale, you can just ask the AI summary to generate the entire concept and things that are around it. And so when it generates, I can go here, I can actually look at this thing. It will actually tell me the entire detail around this multiverse malware. It will tell you what the references are, where it's coming from, which feed, which data, etc., what the profile is, what the impact and capabilities are. And this is where the description or the definition that we've given the summarization object, which it starts to think, it starts to reason, saying, okay, you know what, if these are all the malware that I am looking at this point, which is the context of this particular detail object, is let me try to figure out what the analysis around it is. And after that, it starts to figure out what the kill chain analysis is as well, because as we discussed during the in a part before, how do you start identifying the behavior? What is happening? How does the threat attacker make use of this? The threat context and attribution, saying what are the TTPs, how is the campaign happening, and so on. And last but not the least is this entire detection and hunting. This becomes extremely critical, and you'll see it in other places as well that we'll bring in, because now the analyst can say, send this directly to an operator on the other side, whether it's your level 2, level 3, and so on. Because what that helps is now bringing in the concept of, hey, I, as an analyst, as a threat intelligence analyst, I've done it, and I've actually shared it with the security operations team on the other side, bringing that continuum into the mix. So this was sort of our Gen 1, if you want to call it, because it was very easy, very handy for the analyst as he or she's coming in, take a look at the object, do it, start getting the details around it so that they can leverage and give it to any report, any analyst on the other side, and so on. Then we took a different evolution of this, and what if this is the core construct which most of our customers can use appropriately, and so on. How do you bring in the agents that you see on the right-hand side in our browser at the moment? And so when I go to, let's say, for example, this is our threat detail dashboard, right? You go into any threat data, you can go appropriately saying, hey, you know what, let me look at components around it, and so on. So let's say if I go, this one was just published, I'm assuming. I can do all of those things appropriately that I just showed. But typically, when a report object comes in, it has already been looked at from our deduplication, normalization, scoring, all of those things, and so on. And now I can actually create really interesting threat bulletin, because this is how your execs would probably want to see certain things. And this is the beauty of bringing in the unstructured and the structured data into something that can be manifested very easily. And the The good thing about it is we already come up with some of the suggestions because we've given the definition to this bulletin agent. If I take this outside of the portal, when you're invoking it from your workflow, quote unquote, from an API or a toolset perspective, because these are exposed via MCP and other mechanisms, you can invoke it, ask it to create the thread bulletin based on this information that you give it as this initial data point, entry point, which is, for example, this report object. It will create all of those things for Citic's code platform acts as that core data layer underneath the covers, so that you can have access to any thread data, detail object, the contextualization of it, and so on. And so if let's say I just start it, and this is the beauty when you're doing it within the browser as an analyst, slowly starting to get a feel for it, getting comfortable with it, etc. It starts to say, I can use this page context. The moment I use the page context, the agent underneath the covers looks at this whole thing as its metadata and the core data underneath the covers and starts to reason, saying, okay, you're asking me to create a new thread bulletin. I need to figure out what that thread bulletin means. I need to understand what the data is, what the context is, what the correlations are, etc. It's as simple as that. And very similar in the UI, you can do that over an API invocation as well. So this is the beauty of the agent, because it has been given that definition. It actually works on that definition and on that goal so that you are constrained around it appropriately as well. And while this is happening, you can do other things as needed. So if this is the typical CTI analyst who he or she is asking certain things to be built, asking certain things to be generated, and I'm going to do analysis on something else. For example, I'm going to look at certain threat actors that I might be needing to do certain aliasing around and so on, because that will allow me to do multiple tasks at the same time, which is a typical thing. So if I look at our threat actors who are there right now, maybe I look at Muddy Water, which is a typical one that I'm pretty sure everybody has heard of. I can start looking at it, and I said, look, there is an executive overview available. And this is where, because we ingest data from all feeds, something has changed with respect to a new data component that has come in. And you can now enable your AI to regenerate it as needed. And once you give the regenerate action, it will get that information, see what the components around it are. It'll give the indication on this icon that you see here. It'll allow you to find that, hey, there is a new one that has been generated. We can put it appropriately as well. So an analyst doing multiple things. On one hand, this new report bulletin that's getting created, and by very nature of this non-determinism that the AI has, sometimes it may take 30 seconds, sometimes it may take a few minutes to generate that thread bulletin appropriately. And the nature of how the analyst can do is, once this is going on, he or she can keep doing something else as well. So our system is programmed that way. The platform works that way, so that whenever this is exposed via MCP as well, if somebody on the other side wants to keep having the invocation while a user on the front end as well is leveraging it to do certain things, you can have that same capability in a parallel mechanism. The thread bulletin has been created. I can go in, I can see what the thread bulletins were. The latest one would have been created from the same naming convention. You can actually look at it, and this is the beauty of it. It's actually created that entire threat overview from an unstructured and structured data perspective. It has identified where the elements are, what the findings are, what the indicators of compromise are, the entire thing. Now, again, beauty of this is it's within the platform. It has got all the RBAC control over it. You can create the TLPs as need be as well. You can now distribute it. You can share it. You can do it to your heart's content. That's awesome. And you saw this indicator, which means the other thing that I had sent in as well, that's also done from the executive summary for Muddy Water. Now it's up to date. There were certain things that got changed because of the external references that has probably come in from lots of different places. The threat attacker, the known aliases, all of those things. Now here we see the known aliases as just one line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up our alias agent, which tries to identify all the components that are now associated with this threat actor called muddy water. It says, yeah, you know what? Can I identify all the aliases around it? And you'll see something once it actually generates that aliases. It may actually recommend certain things as well. And this is that agent brain, because not only does the agent do what the ask is, in this case, the prompt, but because of that chain of thought or the reasoning component that it encompasses, it starts to look at what is the other thing, what is the next thing that I can do in here? What is the thing that I can recommend for the threat analyst so that it actually helps the individual as well? And while this is happening, we can actually go on to the next one as well. And I'll show you another component of it, which is, let's say, I'll go back to my threat data. Again, this is the core of everything that we do from a threat perspective. But while this was happening, let me show you the risk scoring engine. And this is where most of the risk models that get built gets used for your prioritization perspective as well. We've got a default risk model. You can implement any one that you want as well by changing the weights appropriately to your heart's content. And so by definition, you can have any number of elements that are coming in from a source, enrichment, attribution, etc. And nobody has this, which is called the DK component. We are one of the only ones that have that. The DK component is about what is that half-life period of a particular risk, because it does change over time. And so can we change the prioritization appropriately as well? While this is happening, you saw the alias that has changed. It has basically come up with everything. In that exact summary that you saw, it was just, hey, I just had one piece of it. It was just like, oh yeah, I've got quote unquote known aliases. Here it's getting all the data, where it's coming from, and the confidence for that alias, why it's high, where it's getting context from. And this goes back to, quote unquote, one of the questions or one of the discussion points that Patrick and I had, which was about misinformation. And this is where it becomes very important, because it is getting this information from multiple different places. It is identifying, yep, it's the same quote unquote threat actor. Now I can actually make it in a high confidence, from a high confidence standpoint. Now it also allows you to say, hey, this is something that is found in our internal ecosystem. Do you want to now leverage outside data as well to identify additional aliases if you need to? This is where the guardrail comes to picture as well, because it's starting to say, I think you want to do X, I will allow you to do Y, but within this guardrail as well now. So this is how the alias and the detection, alias detection and the normalization start to work. I'll take another agent and give a quick example of that, which is our threat investigation, or threat intelligence perspective, right? And so this was one of a good one that I was looking at. It's a nice malware, and when we were doing this, it gave me significant information of what this actually deals with and so on. And so the first thing that an analyst typically does once he or she finds this out is, okay, let me start to enrich this indicator, map its relationships. How do I do it? Just think about it when it's at scale. When these things are coming in full flow, an analyst humanly is not able to keep pace with it. But given that this is already available, both in this UI and other mechanisms, they can just start doing it as a invocation mechanism, do the calls, get the data, do the analysis around it, all done by agent, showing it to the analyst so that the analyst then does what he or she needs to do. And everything is based on the context of this particular threat actor. And so in this case, malware. Again, non-deterministic, so it may take a few minutes to make this happen. While that's happening, I can show you another one that we are looking. Oh, in this case, it actually did it very quickly. So it has the entire thing. It's got the malware, it's got the adversaries, it's got the reports that it is actually tied to, where does the enrichment is, where is the source coming from. It's, didn't do any external validation because it was fine on the internal side itself, all the mapping that came in, recommended actions, etc. Now you go, it says, hey, do you want me to look at the pivots? And you can start saying, hey, you know what? Yes, pivot. Because what that allows is a typical threat analyst saying, now I have seen this. Now I need to look at the report to see what actually is happening underneath the covers in these report objects, so to speak. All right. And so if I say yes, pivot through both objects, it will start identifying those things as well, right? So I didn't have to give, it is recommending, it is actually giving certain things by itself, giving you information around it. It comes across very simple. Underneath the covers that I was kind of explaining from the architecture slide standpoint, a lot of the things happen. There's a starting objective that's being given. It goes through its ruminations, it goes through its analysis, it goes through its thought process. For a customer, when you've given it your standard operating procedure, so to speak, it looks at the standard operating procedure saying, hey, typically once you do a threat analysis on a particular object, you typically give it to a security operations team. It can actually follow that as well. And so that becomes very handy. It's a mix of what typically happens in a landscape such as any enterprise, but then takes into effect what your customer's personalization model is. I typically do an analysis, an investigation, give it to security operations. I do an analysis, then I do a hunting. So all of that workflow component can be put in as a standard operating procedure, and we can actually read that and actually take benefit of that by leveraging that to see what the workflow should be from an agentic standpoint. And this is where one of the discussion points that happen, which is how do you start scaling? If a human has to do this, you can't scale. And so your standard operating procedures come in very handy. And this is very handy even to start small in the MVP perspective, saying, I'm going to only start taking a look at vulnerabilities, for example. I'm not going to touch on the malware at the moment. I'm not going to touch on something else. I'm going to look at vulnerability because vulnerability is so important based on my ecosystem stack. Typically, threat actors have a preference for a tech stack X, Y, Z, etc. They are, as Anthropic also showed, they want to use as less of an effort to get the best, most returns, if you will. And so if they know that tech stack X has these vulnerabilities, the best coverage model that you can have is threat actor X is trying to exploit, tech stack Y. Tech stack Y is in your enterprise's ecosystem. And in that, what is the coverage based on this analysis that threat intelligence agent can do? It's actually done all the relationships. It actually did the pivot. It said, hey, what are the places that have the no campaign objects? It's figured out the TTP around it. It's identified all the other capabilities from the other malwares, the recommended. And this is my beautiful part, which I love, which is like, hey, what are the recommended actions in terms of containment? How do you start figuring out what the hunting queries are, for example? This is so powerful. Now I can actually, and this will, potentially give me the recommendation as well, saying, hey, do you want me to do a Splunk hunt? Because it's connected already. The power of our Intel operations platform, the Orchestrate platform, already embedded into Intel Exchange, allows me to have these endpoint connectors. And so knowing that I have Splunk, it says, hey, do you want me to trigger that Splunk hunt? Because now I can do that, figure out which playbook to run, etc., and so on. So that's awesome. So this is the third agent that I wanted to kind of show. And I think the last agent that I wanted to kind of give you an idea of, actually, I probably gave all four of them. The contextual intelligence agent, I gave you that, or maybe not. So let me actually show you the contextual intelligence agent around a domain, because domain is one of those things which has a lot of different information. Maybe it's used for command control, maybe it's used for something else. So, and I'm, as part of that, I will also show you certain things that we do from an Intel Exchange standpoint. I'll just pick any one of them, which has a pretty risky score as it seems. So if I look at the contextual around it, saying, yeah, what, give me all the contextual intelligence report for this threat object. Again, this is how the analyst would be doing. And if the analyst is using a workflow that you have developed, quote unquote, that can be done as well. And so hopefully you guys got an idea of, we spoke about the art of the possible. You got an idea of how we think in the threat intelligence world of leveraging agents to help the analyst do his or her job much better. Very deliberate at the right places so that it doesn't feel a stretch and can be scaled so that anytime it happens, you can scale it based on an API invocation, etc. And last but not the least is the guardrails is not only this process information, etc., that is being shown, but the entire audit trail, the entire explainability, the entire graph is available for somebody to take a look at it from an API perspective as well. And so with that, cognizant of time, let me pause my demo and hand it back to Patrick.
All right. Sachin, can you hear me okay on audio here?
I can hear you.
Excellent. All right. So lots covered there. That was a rich demo. Thank you. So let's hit, we've got a few questions that have come through. So why don't we hit these really quickly since we've taken up such a good amount of time here. First question, and I'll turn on my video here since we're back on. There we go. All right. First question for you, Sachin. For an analyst currently buried in alerts, what does that transition actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So one of the customers that we work with and other places that I have advised is an analyst who's buried with alerts is take any of the agents that we have, quote unquote, and put it in line with your workflow. If you want to start even smaller, you can take a few of those risk scored parameters and alerts that we have seen from a threat perspective and say, these are the alerts that I'm going to triage first. Leverage the agents in your browser, etc., to quickly analyze that, quickly hunt it. So instead of the 2-hour analysis, the 2-hour investigation that you do, it is now down to about 10 minutes investigation, and you're good with that. Second is now you take on these agents, make your own workflow as needed, and as the quote unquote alerts come in, both from a SIM side, on the SOC side, coming to threat intelligence, or from the threat data feed directly, pipe it into these agents so that it can do the analysis, it can do the investigation, it can do the intelligence around it, and give you the things that you should be working on. That's how the analyst needs to kind of pivot their mindset when the alert triage happens at scale.
Good, nice. We're going to go to one more question for time, and audience here, if there's any questions that we haven't gotten to, we'll reply to those directly offline. So we'll follow up with that. But last question for you here, Sachin. If we move to this agentic model, how does the intelligence actually become the brain of the response instead of just another feed that we need to deal with? Yeah,
that's kind of the $1 million question, or the money question, so to speak. For me, and I think for the industry at large, it's always been, hey, how do we take advantage of the data that's coming in from the threat intelligence perspective? And until now, it was a case of the data is there, let's do something with it, so to speak. With the agents and with the AI and the models that are coming in, I think there are 3 key things that we can do at scale that changes the paradigm. One is moving away from your traditional IOCs and indicators to IOBs, which is behavior. And you saw one of the agents listed there, which is the attack flow, which is all about how do you figure out the behavior of the threat attacker, so to speak. And it is very much driven by the intelligence data that's coming in. Second is quote unquote the scenarios. And this is where the collective defense starts to play in, which is what are the different scenarios now, given the possibility of the behavior of this threat attacker, what are the different scenarios that we need to accommodate for, etc. And this can be done at scale leveraging AI. Last but not the least is now this level 1, level 2, level 3, quote unquote, traditional definition will start to become a little bit more continuum as opposed to just breaking it in silos, so to speak. And intelligence becomes the brain because it is one fabric that allows everybody to have the same context to take decisions around. When General McChrystal wrote this book of Team of Teams, the notion was very simple, which is everybody has intelligence that should be shared, but the actioning team, quote unquote, takes the action based on the context that they are involved in. But you need to have the same intelligence shared across, and that's why intelligence becomes the brain. And I think that's what we are trying to get into here at Cyware as well.
Awesome. Excellent. So that's going to wrap us up for today. But I'm going to give you, let's say, what's your 10-second takeaway thought that you want to leave our audience with?
AI is here to stay, so don't shy away from it. And we are here as a community to actually work together to defend that scale. So for anything that we can do, count us in.
Excellent. Sachin, thank you so much. So many rich insights and a look into AI at work in a threat-centric security operations manner. So thank you so much for the time today. Folks, hope you all enjoyed the session. All the best. Cheers.
Thank you so much.